Welcome back to the pharmaphorum podcast. In this episode, I speak with ZS Associates Sharon Karlsberg, Principal and Leader of Oncology Solutions, and Brandi Davis-Dusenbery, Principal and Partner. We explore the potential for scaling artificial intelligence in the biopharmaceutical industry. From the possibilities of synthetic patient populations in clinical trials to patent authoring and other document automation, Sharon and Brandi explain the wide application and benefits that advanced technologies can offer across the life sciences and bring cutting-edge care to more patients faster and safely. Tune in, have a listen, and if you've any comments, send them in to the editorial inbox. And, as ever, thank you for listening. Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Sharon Karlsberg, Principal and Leader of Oncology Solutions at ZS Associates, and Brandi Davis-Dusenbery, Principal and Partner at ZS Associates, a management consulting and technology firm that partners with companies to improve life and how we live it. Welcome both.
Good morning, Nicole.
Good morning.
So, ZS Associates transforms ideas into impact by bringing together data, science, technology, and human ingenuity to deliver better outcomes for all. Founded in 1983, the company has more than 13,000 employees and over 35 offices worldwide. And today, Sharon, Brandi, and I will be discussing the widespread implementation of artificial intelligence, but how scale of that advanced technology is still largely lacking. To begin with, though, perhaps you could both introduce yourselves, your respective journeys to today, doing what you do with ZS Associates.
I'm happy to start, Nicole. I've had the privilege of being at ZS now for 20 years of my 25 plus year career in the pharmaceutical industry. What I've always loved about ZS and what drew me to the organization is our ability to bring together data and we'll call it secondary analytic information together with domain knowledge, deep domain knowledge about therapeutic areas, about the biopharmaceutical and medical industries, and pair that with the deep understanding and empathy for the patient experience, the healthcare provider experience, to really envision and help implement better solutions across the drug discovery, development, and commercialization continuum. I've always been really fascinated by the ability to bring science and medicine and business together to develop new and better therapies for cancer patients. And now, as the leader of our design and planning practice in clinical development at ZS, I think about how we can expand those solutions beyond oncology to the portfolios of all companies to help accelerate getting important new therapies to patients.
Thank you, Sharon.
And thanks, Nicole, for the opportunity to chat with you today. So I come as a compliment to Sharon. I've actually just been with ZS for about a year now, and I come by way of spending 10 years building a startup where we supported the use of biomedical data and bioinformatics to understand causal disease biology, identifying novel ways to subsegment patients based on genomics and other types of data, as well as to enhance the basic research through cloud-based computing technologies. Prior to that, I was a PhD in biochemistry postdoc at Harvard, where I was focused on understanding the underpinnings of ALS using these large scale data sets. And I really came to ZS for the ability to connect the basic science within the discovery practice, which I'm a leader, all the way through to development, and then ultimately getting the right therapies into the hands of patients as quickly as possible. So I'm delighted to be here and certainly to speak today about how AI is improving our ability to do all of this faster.
Thank you, Brandi. So let's turn to it then. AI, or artificial intelligence. Let's discuss what AI in the sense of drug discovery and development does, really. What's its possibilities? Why this big sort of buzz, hype, etc. around it? So who wants to set the scene first? What's the clinical research landscape look like now that AI is very much part of the process?
I can start us off, Nicole. What's exciting is that we've been using data and information to improve our clinical development process, looking at things like how can we bring more data-driven solutions into where we place our trials in terms of geographies, or how we think about optimizing the mix of clinical trial sites and investigators that participate by looking at historical experience, looking at company experience, looking at even industry experience. What's been frustrating, however, is as we've seen remarkable advancements in technology, discovery of novel molecular pathways, new ways of understanding biological systems, the conversion of those discoveries into faster development has been lacking. We're seeing trials that have more endpoints than ever before, more scheduled assessment. It's taking longer to recruit patients and it's costing more. Clinical development has essentially become a very competitive field into itself as the pharmaceutical industry has expanded. And so there's a real need for significant change to improve the scalability, the speed, and the personalization of drug discovery and development to meet the needs of an increasingly sophisticated scientific approach to drug development. And so what's gotten industry really excited is the idea of taking things like digital simulations. Think of terms like digital twins, creating in silico patient populations to model in a computerized system using a variety of historical data, using a variety of laboratory data, historical claims, real world data, patient records, and build simulated populations that are able to model and predict what are the likely outcomes we will see in clinical trials. And there's a lot of different kinds of digital twins. I think part of the excitement you're seeing is the ability to look at in silico modeling at the molecular level. How can we model what's changing in the way that three-dimensional structures and protein folding structures will interact with known targets? We can look at simulations on population dynamics. How can we understand, knowing human biology, knowing differences and nuances of disease states like asthma or Alzheimer's, cancer? How can we model the expected effect of a drug in terms of the pharmacokinetics, the pharmacodynamics in a simulated patient population? We can use in silico approaches to change trial design, to look at what might happen if we change different parameters of comparator arms or inclusion-exclusion criteria, and what effect might that have on our ability to make trials more accessible to more patients. And as I mentioned, probably the earliest application of AI is modeling some of the clinical trial operational components. How can we look at the expected enrollment time for different studies with different parameters? How might we look at forecasting the need for clinical trial supply? So what we're seeing is excitement around that end-to-end potential for in silico and digital approaches leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to reduce the need for quite as much wet chemistry, lab chemistry, reduce the need for experimenting in human populations, reduce the numbers of patients who might be exposed to, say, a historical or a placebo control arm, so that we can be more effective with our research time and more respectful of tailoring treatment to patients with a higher likelihood of success.
Thank you, Sharon.
Maybe if it's okay, I'll just add around this point that not only are we applying AI to the research and many of the super innovative things that Sharon described, but there's also a number of more fundamental places where generative AI and other types of AI are helping facilitate the end process. And I think a great example of this is document authoring. So, for example, we know earlier this year, Sanofi reported automation of about 60% of their regulatory documents, which are, supported through generative AI, but then reviewed, edited by a human. This allows them to save 40% of the overall time spent in their phase 2 application. So you can imagine as they're scaling up, going from phase 2 into phase 3, that allows them to really produce much greater kind of results ultimately for patients. We've also seen significant benefit of using generative AI for patent authoring, not just in speed, but also in improving the ability to capture the provenance of claims much more consistently and automatically in an end-to-end way. So I think we have both this ability to do things that we were previously doing easier and faster, as well as this shift to doing things in a fundamentally new way, like Sharon had discussed.
Thank you, Brandi. So if we turn specifically to the patients now, and namely patient care, we've been discussing a lot about the access, getting these treatments to patients, but also about this, you mentioned, Sharon, this reduction in experimentation in human populations. What role does AI play if we're focusing on patients in the scalability, how these benefits can be scaled for better patient care in the future?
Let me give two examples, Nicole. One at the early stages of clinical development. So as you know, the FDA, the EMA, both very concerned about dose optimization for patients. And there's a great deal of time in early clinical trials trying to align on the right dose for a patient. A company like Sanofi, who's been using the concept of digital twins and insilico modeling in a disease state like asthma, they were able to use the digital twin approach to create a virtual asthma patient population. And they ran a study in parallel, phase 1 study, but without using the inputs from that phase 1 study, they ran a model on a simulated patient population that was accurately able to predict not only the pharmacokinetics and understand the right dosing from a phase 1b trial, but they were able to compare a novel drug against existing in-market therapies to test if their novel therapy would offer a significant enough benefit that it was worth advancing in development. As a result of this simulation, not only were they able to, with confidence, move their drug into phase 2b trials, but they were able to skip the dose-ranging phase 2a study that would normally be required. And we've now seen evidence both from the EMA and from the FDA that they're willing to accept and, in fact, embrace this model-infused drug development, model-informed drug development, MIDD is what the FDA calls it, because what's helping reduce the number of patients that are going to be exposed in the case of the Sanofi asthma drug, fewer patients exposed to experimental doses of the drug and more patients going directly into a later stage trial that will benefit from an optimized dose that will offer therapeutic benefit with reduced side effects. If we go to the other end of the spectrum, so again, that's an example of applying digital twins and in silico modeling to both shorten the development timeline and reduce the exposure of patients to experimental doses to move right to the therapeutically optimal dose, saving time and money and patients. In the case of how might we think about scaling these kinds of digital approaches, I'll turn to an example that ZS pioneered with one of our top 10 pharma clients. The company was facing a situation where they said, we want to make sure, this was in oncology, they've also applied the approach in immunology and neurology. We want to make sure that our trials are representative of the patients who are affected by the disease. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about efforts to improve diversity and inclusiveness in trial representation. One of the things that gets in the way is an old mentality, I'll call it copy and paste inclusion-exclusion criteria. Scientists who don't want to put their trial at risk for either not showing sufficient efficacy or showing exaggerated concerns around toxicity they want to be very conservative in how they set the limits of who is eligible for those trials. But sometimes those cutoffs prevent patients from having access to cutting-edge care. So in this case, ZS was able to take claims records and electronic health records and create a synthetic patient population and a disease state and say, if we increase, say, the HbA1c levels, or if we increase the kidney filtration rate, or if we increase the body mass index that would allow patients into the trial, how might that affect the likely efficacy and safety outcomes? And we modeled that in in silico population, came back to the sponsor, and were able to actually widen the inclusion-exclusion criteria, which allowed for a much higher proportion of African-American patients to participate in a cancer trial. It allowed more Hispanic patients to participate in an immunology trial. And by way of using these AI tools in silico modeling, we're able to expand those historical IE criteria to open up access to new medicines and breaking cutting-edge care for more patients.
Thank you, Sharon. Did you want to add anything to that, Brandi?
No, I think that's a wonderful example.
So as we've been discussing, this is all going towards ameliorating health equity, which in itself is a broad topic. So it's just amazing, really, if we think about AI's applicability. And so much has happened in a seemingly short time. The technology has been there in the last few years, accelerated by the pandemic. It's really brought things to the fore. So let's turn to projections now. There's always projections at the end of these types of conversations. What next for AI in the life sciences and, as we've been discussing, at scale and equitably?
I think it's a little bit less about what's next for AI and maybe a little bit more about what's next for what I would say is the fuel of AI, which is the underlying data. I think this touches back very nicely to the equity piece and the inclusion piece that Sharon spoke to. We're seeing more and more data is coming into AI models, not just in kind of increasing the types of data, but also increasing the number of participants in these studies, increasing the sources, so using public data, using internal data in a more kind of creative and inclusive ways. But I think it's critically important that as we think about using these different types of data, making them interoperable, that we're incorporating and putting a fine point on ensuring that the data that we do include in the models represents the global population. And just to give you an example of why this is so very important, if we look just in 2021 on participants who participated in genome-wide association studies. So these are studies that are trying to link genetic signatures with disease or phenotypes. 90% of participants in these studies were of European ancestry. Of course, this leads to lack of translation of findings from these studies to our global population. And one of the reasons that I'm really excited about some of the new studies that are coming online, including all of us, is that they include a much more diverse set of participants, including for all of us, 80% participants from groups that have been historically underrepresented in biomedical research. So it's imperative that these data sets are integrated and made interoperable with internal and historic data sets so that we really have the data to fuel the next generation of these AI applications in a representative and equitable way.
Thank you, Brandi. Did you want to add anything, Sharon?
Yes, I think that, some of the challenges that we run into, there are geographies where they're not allowed to collect data in clinical trials. I believe France and Germany are two examples where you cannot collect race or ethnicity data. So we have to look at other ways of ensuring representation. That can be looking at age, it can be looking at gender. Women are still disproportionately underrepresented in clinical trials. Looking at, of course, cases of pregnancy or young children who should be studied. And in this way, I think what we'll see are more applications of AI to, again, improve the safety of treatments that are given and reduce the number of patients that are exposed to, historical treatments that may not be effective. A good example I wanted to share, Nicole, is the EMA actually qualified a digital twin model on Learn AI to create a regulatory framework and approve the idea of digital twins for randomized control modeling. And they were able to show a reduction in the size of the control arm by 33% in a study of Alzheimer's disease, which saved approximately $50 million off the cost of the trial. But more importantly, it meant more patients were going onto the active investigational agents. So opening up the trial to more patients. And the more that we can do this, you talk about what the future is. In the past, we've rarely seen approvals based on what I'll call real world controls or real world data as the as the comparator arm. And what that allows us to do is more effectively design treatments for rare patient populations, more effectively design treatments for women of childbearing age, because we can use historical data and focus our clinical research on patients who really are affected by these conditions. Which, when I think about, patients who need breakthrough treatments for high unmet disease areas, we of course want them to receive active therapies so that they can benefit from those treatments. Now, Brandi spoke about the importance of data in representation. We do hear frequently from our clients that they are, all of them, experimenting with AI, all of them that they are starting to do pilot applications, prototyping, embedding AI models in different parts of the development process. But there's very, very few, if any, organizations that are working end to end to implement this kind of AI-guided in silico drug development end to end. And Brandi, I don't know if you want to comment on, beyond the data availability, what are some of the technology innovations? And then maybe I can speak to some of the organizational and people needs that need to be in place in order to effectively scale AI-guided drug development.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out, Sharon. So as we mentioned, the data are increasing, at an accelerating pace, which I think in and of itself puts a large strain on, the technology. So, and I think the way to consider the acceleration of data is not just in number, but really in the diversity, right? So you're now seeing that, instead of just doing a whole genome sequence, maybe you're doing whole genome RNA-seq and many other types of, analytics in addition to sensor data or imaging data. And so developing the technological frameworks that are able to incorporate all of these data into something that research scientists as well as others in the organization are able to benefit from is a really significant challenge. We've seen quite a lot of benefit in the use of knowledge graphs to be able to structure data. We know that, for example, AbbVie has incorporated 20 different data sources into their ARCH platform to be able to provide this data at kind of the hands of their researchers across. As it relates to technology, I think, and maybe this is a lead into your next kind of topic, Sharon, is it's really always critical to emphasize that the tool needs to be selected based on the job to be done, and really encourage our technologists to fall in love with the problem and not the technology, so that you're able to solve the business needs.
I love that, Brandi, falling in love with the problem, not the technology. So, Nicole, we've spoken about data availability, and that goes for access to data, representation in data. We've talked about data, we've talked about technology and the need for technology to address the problem. I also want to make sure we touch on organizationally what needs to change in terms of governance and what needs to change in terms of people, right? One of the barriers to AI adoption is that it can be threatening to individuals. It can feel foreign, it can feel inaccessible. So to Brandi's point, implementing these AI-guided tools, whether it's creating a real-world modeled cohort for your clinical trial design, or it's re-examining the IE criteria, we need to build those tools into the process that scientists and trial developers are executing today to make it easy to use in their day-to-day organization, in their day-to-day work. We need to support that with role modeling and championing at the highest levels. And what we see from sponsor organizations that are really moving quickly into embedding AI across their processes is that they celebrate each implementation across the whole company and create great visibility to celebrate the individuals that are bringing forward those examples. And then we need governance to make sure that that is a part of the way that all team members are expected to work. It is recognized, it is built into regulatory reviews, it is built into leadership reviews, and it is rewarded by the kind of behavior that helps individuals, their teams, and their organizations move more quickly and reduce costs to getting these new drugs to patients. And what I find really inspiring about this is the idea that behind it is how might we help more patients discover new medicines. We've been talking a lot about drug development and some of the discovery. On the other end, we can use AI. We've been using AI for a while to identify patients in electronic health records and in databases. We can identify patients who might be eligible for clinical trials and reach out to them. But what about patients who don't recognize that they may even have the condition? We can now use what we know from ethnography, from understanding different patient populations, and we can find the best social media channels to reach out to them. There are, a very high degree, more than 50% of patients who expressed an interest in participating in clinical trials were never invited to participate by a physician or by an investigator in a survey that ZS ran in 2022. And what we notice is we need to find a way to meet patients where they're at. So there is this wonderful connectivity between the idea of using in silico models and AI-guided models to transform the way we look at drug interaction modeling, the way we design our clinical trials, the way we execute our studies, the way we reach more patients. And on the other end, it's helping make sure those treatments are available to patients who are aware of their condition, informed about their medical needs, and can then seek the right kind of breakthrough treatments that are being developed for rare patients, for children, for women, for patients of all races and backgrounds, to make sure that we're making care accessible. It's part of our mission, right? And how I think sponsors and companies like ZS, we're all trying to create more impact by getting these medicines to all patients faster.
Available, accessible, representative, respectful, and real. Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole.
And so that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, and pretty much wherever you get your other podcasts. Just search for pharmaphorum and press subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us as well on X or Twitter and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.